Have you ever felt completely justified in your anger, only to realize later that you overreacted? What if that certainty, that voice in your head insisting you're right, isn't really you at all? Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, believed that much of what we call ourself is actually the ego, a fragile, reactive part of our mind that's more concerned with defending its own story than seeing the truth. He once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, we're often not in control. We're just convinced we are. You probably recognize that stubborn feeling of being right, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Many of us cling to familiar ideas because they make us feel safe, even when those ideas keep us stuck. Think back to a time when you realized a childhood belief wasn't quite true. Maybe you thought adults had everything figured out, only to discover later that they were just winging it. That moment of realization is a small version of what Jung called individuation, the process of seeing past the ego's illusions and connecting with a deeper, wiser part of yourself. The ego isn't some villain. It's just doing its job. Its role is to protect our sense of identity, but it often goes too far. Have you ever gotten defensive when someone criticized you, even if part of you knew they had a point? That's the ego reacting, trying to shield you from discomfort. The problem is, when we let the ego run the show, we end up trapped in cycles of reaction, anger, blame, self-justification, instead of responding with clarity. Jung believed that beneath the ego's noise, there's a quieter, more aware part of us, the self, with a capital S. This isn't some mystical idea. It's the part of you that observes your thoughts instead of being lost in them. You felt it before, that moment when you step back during an argument and think, "Why am I so worked up?" That's the self peeking through. The trouble is, the ego hates that. It wants to stay in charge, so it distracts you with strong emotions, old habits, and the need to be right. Here's where things get interesting. The ego isn't just your personal quirks. It's shaped by everything you've been taught, every hurt you've endured, every role you've played to fit in. You might think your reactions are uniquely yours, but Jung would say they're often borrowed from family, culture, or past experiences. For example, if you grew up in a household where anger was the go-to response, you might default to it without even questioning why. The ego loves these patterns because they're familiar, even if they don't serve you anymore. So how do we start untangling this? The first step is noticing. Next time you feel a strong reaction bubbling up, whether it's irritation, defensiveness, or the need to prove a point, pause. Ask yourself, is this really me, or is this my ego trying to protect something? You don't have to suppress the feeling, just observe it. This simple act creates space between you and the reaction, and in that space, you regain choice. Jung's approach wasn't about destroying the ego, it was about balancing it. He compared the psyche to a tree. The ego is the visible trunk and branches, but the roots, the unconscious, run deep. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It just means they control you from the shadows. Ever had a day where you woke up irritable for no clear reason? That's the unconscious at work. By paying attention to these undercurrents through dreams, journaling, or just honest reflection, you start to bring them into the light. This isn't about becoming perfectly calm or never feeling anger again. It's about no longer being enslaved by your reactions. Think of the last time you regretted something you said in the heat of the moment. What if, instead of spiraling into guilt, you could see that moment as data, a clue about where your ego is still running the show? Over time, these clues add up, and you begin to recognize your patterns before they hijack you. The real shift happens when you stop identifying with every thought and feeling that pops up. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Just because you feel it doesn't mean you have to act on it. This cracks open a door to something we all experience, but rarely talk about. The moment we realize our reactions don't serve us. It's like waking up to the fact that we've been on autopilot, responding to life in ways that feel familiar, but leave us stuck. The journey to mastering the ego isn't about suppressing who we are. It's about understanding why we react the way we do and learning to choose something better. And like any meaningful journey, it unfolds in 3 phases. In the beginning, things seem simple. We see the world in clear-cut terms, good or bad, right or wrong. Our reactions are immediate, almost instinctive. If someone cuts us off in traffic, we yell. If a coworker dismisses our idea, we shut down or fire back. At this stage, we don't question our impulses. We just follow them. It's comfortable because it's familiar. You might be someone who resists change at first, preferring the certainty of old habits over the uncertainty of growth. Most of us do. But beneath the surface, there's a quiet tension, a sense that these knee-jerk reactions aren't really getting us where we want to go. Then comes the middle phase, where everything gets confusing. This is when we start to question our automatic responses, but don't yet have the tools to replace them. Carl Jung called this the shadow work, the messy, uncomfortable process of facing the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. It's like walking through a fog. We know there's a path, but we can't quite see it. We might catch ourselves pausing before reacting lately, but then we second-guess that pause. Was it weakness? Was it growth? The lines blur. Jung believed this tension was necessary, a sign that we're stretching beyond our old limits. Most of us feel uneasy during transitions, and this phase is no exception. It's where we're tempted to go back to the simplicity of the beginning, even though we know it no longer fits. But if we stay with the discomfort, something shifts. The fog lifts, and we enter the 3rd phase. New clarity. This isn't about perfection or never reacting impulsively again. It's about noticing the space between stimulus and response, and realizing we have a choice in how we fill it. Carl Jung's work reminds us that the ego isn't the enemy. It's just one part of a larger system. The key is integrating it, not fighting it. Thoughtful responses replace knee-jerk reactions, not because we've become flawless, but because we've learned to listen to ourselves more deeply. You might start to see old triggers as opportunities to practice patience, or you might find that what once upset you now barely registers. We start noticing these subtle changes, and they become the foundation of a new way of being. The difference between reacting and responding is like the difference between a storm and a steady rain. One tears through everything in its path, the other nourishes. Jung's contrast between the unconscious, where our reactions live, and the conscious, where our choices take shape, helps us understand why the middle phase feels so chaotic. It's where the two collide. But through that collision, we find balance. We begin to see that our initial reactions are just data, not directives. They tell us something about our wounds, our fears, our unmet needs, but they don't have to dictate our actions. Everyday life becomes the training ground for this shift. Maybe it's the way you handle a rude comment from a stranger, or how you navigate a disagreement with a loved one. The old version of you might have escalated the situation. The new version pauses. You might even surprise yourself by responding with curiosity instead of defensiveness. These moments are small but significant. They're proof that the work is paying off. And while the middle phase feels endless when we're in it, looking back, we see it was just a bridge, a necessary passage from simplicity through complexity to something wiser. The Barnum effect tells us we're drawn to statements that feel personal, but are actually universal. So if you've ever thought, "I'm the only one struggling with this," remember, most of us feel uneasy during transitions. You're not alone in the messy middle, and you're not alone in the breakthroughs either. We all trip over the same hurdles. We all discover the same truths in our own time. The ego doesn't vanish in this process. It just becomes a partner instead of a dictator. It learns to share the stage with patience, empathy, and intention. By the end of this journey, the discomfort begins to make sense. It wasn't a sign we were failing. It was a sign we were growing. The ego's loudest protests often come right before its biggest surrenders. And in that surrender, we find something surprising. Freedom. Freedom to choose, to respond, to rewrite the stories we've been telling ourselves. Through this discomfort, we begin to see the cracks in what we once thought was solid ground. It's not easy, this feeling of unease, this sense that something isn't quite right. But here's the thing, those cracks let the light in. They show us where we've outgrown old ways of thinking, where we've been wearing shoes that pinch our toes without even realizing it. And while it might feel unsettling at first, this is where the real work begins. And while it might feel unsettling at first, this is where the real work begins. This is where we start to ask the questions that matter. You've probably noticed it before. Those moments when a decision that used to tie you in knots suddenly feels clearer, or when an old frustration that used to ruin your day barely registers now. It's not that life has gotten easier, it's that you've changed. The Barnum effect, that tendency to see vague statements as deeply personal, plays a role here. We all do it. We hear something like, "You're harder on yourself than you need to be," and think, "That's so me." And in a way it is, because growth often starts with recognizing the patterns we've been stuck in. Together we discover that the discomfort isn't a sign we're doing it wrong. It's a sign we're doing it right. Think about the last time you learned something new, a skill, a habit, a way of thinking. At first, it felt awkward, maybe even impossible, but over time, with practice, it became part of you. The same is true here. The unease is just the growing pains of becoming more yourself. Many notice old frustrations don't bother them as much. It's not that they've become passive or indifferent. It's that they've learned to see those frustrations for what they are. Signposts pointing toward what really matters. When we stop fighting the wrong battles, we free up energy for the ones that count. You'll likely find daily decisions coming easier, not because the decisions themselves have changed, but because you have. The noise fades, and the signal gets clearer. This isn't about arriving at some perfect state where everything makes sense. It's about learning to walk with the questions, to hold space for the uncertainty. It's about realizing that the answers aren't fixed. They shift as we do. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's what keeps us curious, keeps us growing. There's a freedom in this, a lightness. Carl Jung put it perfectly when he said that true freedom feels like finally taking off shoes that never quite fit. We didn't realize how much they were holding us back until we slipped them off. And suddenly, the ground beneath us feels different, softer, more forgiving, more alive. Together we discover that this is what it means to come home to ourselves. It's not a grand finale or a dramatic revelation. It's quieter than that, subtler. It's the way you catch yourself smiling at something that used to make you sigh. The way you pause before reacting, giving yourself just a little more grace. The way old wounds start to feel less like open sores and more like scars. Proof that you've healed. Proof that you're still here. This journey doesn't end. It just changes shape. And that's the beauty of it. We keep learning, keep stumbling, keep getting back up. And each time, we're a little wiser, a little kinder, to others and to ourselves. So here's to the discomfort. Here's to the cracks. Here's to the shoes that never quite fit, and the courage to kick them off. Together, we discover that the light was always there, waiting for us to notice. And now that we have, there's no going back. And isn't that something to celebrate?